Look what he did. This cat is insane about cardboard. He will tear right into it. Okay, where was I? Hello. I want to talk to you today about alcohol markers and why I don't use them a lot and why I feel like they're not necessarily the best art supply to start with if you haven't been doing art before and you're sort of like starting from zero with what materials you have. In this much cat-chewed container, I have most of my alcohol markers. These are from Tiger, or I guess Flying Tiger now. So these were basically €1 per marker, but I also have one set of slightly fancier markers, which are the Winsor & Newton brush markers, and these are in skin tones, and my friend very generously gave these to me for my birthday a couple of years ago. Look, I have some marker on my finger. Yeah, so those like kids markers are usually water-based, which means that if you use them on a paper that isn't designed to, you know, accommodate water-based media, it's gonna quite quickly tear through the paper. So alcohol markers, as you might have guessed, are alcohol-based, which allows you to layer them a lot more because they don't make the paper as wet. I don't really know. Hey cat, can you... Look what he did. This cat is insane about cardboard. He will tear right into it. Okay, where was I? Anyway, so you can use alcohol markers to sort of layer stuff without tearing up your paper. That's, I guess, the main benefit. These Tiger markers that I have are come with like a bullet nib, which is just like a pointy thing. Why did I do that? And then they also have a chisel nib, which is what most markers usually have on the other end, which is just like a wider tip. I guess Copic markers are probably the biggest brand of alcohol markers out there, and they, as these brush markers do, they on the other hand have like a brush tip, which looks pretty much the same as the bullet tip when you look at it like this. It's just a bit longer, but when you like draw with it, it's like sort of bendy like a brush would be, so it's easier to sort of like create line variation and like blend and stuff. But yeah, I don't have a whole lot of these markers, as you can tell, and therein lies the problem, because like obviously you can do a whole bunch of stuff with markers if you have like a lot of colors. Like if you have the whole range of Copic markers, which is like hundreds of them, then you can do like a whole bunch of things with that. But the problem is that alcohol markers can be quite pricey. I've understood that there are a lot of options out there these days, like Ohuhu markers, which aren't as pricey, but then the problem with those often is that they don't have as big of a selection of colors as something like Copic markers would, and then Copic markers are really expensive, so if you want to get like a whole big variety of colors, you're going to have to use a lot of money for that. And the thing about alcohol markers, or markers in general, I guess, which I have never enjoyed, is that you have one marker, you have one color. So this is my previous attempt at filming this video. So basically, I have this color. It's a little bit lighter when I color with the chisel nib than it is when I color with the bullet nib, and then I can sort of layer it on top of it itself to make it a slight bit darker, but all of these are basically the same color. And that's my issue here. Like, if I don't have a lot of markers, I also don't have a lot of colors. That's what I'm trying to say here. And my alternative, which I suggest you might want to get into as opposed to markers, if you don't have any art supplies yet and you're wondering what to start with, is, well, the cat might have given it away, but it's watercolors. So this is basically like a very cheap school grade watercolor set that I have had for a while. Very simple, also very messy. I've been actually meaning to get rid of this one because I don't use it anymore, but this has 9 colors. It's got black and white, and then 2 shades of red, 2 shades of blue, a yellow and a green, and then a brown. brown. What I have used more than this is this this set, which is kind of similar. It's got one color less, but it's got like a cold yellow and a warm yellow, then a cold... No, this is the warm red. Warm red and a cold red, and then a warm blue and a cold blue. Why are... These are the wrong way around. And then a black and a white. I never noticed that before, now that's gonna annoy me. These are not traditionally exactly watercolors. I haven't found a word in English for what they are. In Finnish it's peiteväri, but basically they're slightly more opaque than regular watercolors, a little bit more like gouache, but they mostly still function like watercolor. And watercolors, obviously there are very fancy, expensive ones out there that you might want to get if you're like a fancy real artist or whatever, but you can get like a set such as this for very, very cheap, for like about the price of, well, depending on the brand of marker, but I'm gonna say you can get tops 10 markers for the price that you can get a set like this. And sometimes they can be like even cheaper. Like this is one of the first watercolor sets when I started like making art more. I actually like genuinely used this set. I made a whole illustration for like a children's book with this set, which is insane to me now that I think of it. I'll put an example on screen of a page from that book, and like I was using like printer paper and these things. This is like cut out from one of those like children's art kits. And these are like really bad watercolors. Let me just like... First of all, they like get weirdly foamy when you put water on them, which I don't know why it does that. And it's like chalky and kind of awful. But you know, you get some bright colors out of those and all of that. So like, it's completely usable. But yeah, so why is watercolor superior to markers in this sense? Well, you saw me use the red right there, so I'm just gonna use this red because it's like the cleanest one out of the two. So I put quite a lot of paint on that so I can get a pretty like darker or more opaque color. And then I'll add a little bit of water and get like a lighter tone and keep adding water and then like keep getting lighter and lighter tones like this. And then if I want to make it even lighter, I should have prepared for this, but I did not, so I'm just going to use my sleeve instead of paper. I can sort of like dab at it and then get even more color off. This is not watercolor paper, so it doesn't work as well as it might, but you can just sort of like lift the color after the fact by like dabbing it, and you can get to like a very pale, barely visible color with this. But you can also get the like very bright red out of it. And that's why I think that if you don't have art supplies yet and you want to start with something, you should start with watercolor, because for the price of like, you know, what is this, 8 of these little cakes, what are they called? Anyway, for the price of like 8 colors, you get way more colors than that. And like, you can also obviously mix colors with watercolors. Let me just like grab a little bit like yellow from here and a little bit of the red, a little bit more yellow. I usually like to end with the lighter color. And I get this sort of like orange color quite easily, just like that. And now I do have an orange marker, which is slightly darker, but a pretty similar color, and if I added a little bit more red to this, I could probably make it quite similar. But I don't have an orange watercolor. I do have an orange marker, but I could still make the same color without having an orange watercolor. Whereas with the markers, if I take this sort of like warmer yellow, okay, that's almost orange, let me take the other one. Well, none of those are great, but let me just try both of them. So let me try to make that color with the markers first, like with the red and then the lighter yellow maybe. Doesn't really do a whole lot. Maybe if I put down the other yellow first and then add a bit of red. Yeah, no. See, like, you can't really mix colors with the markers, especially if you don't have very light colors. And that's what I've watched a lot of videos of different YouTubers trying different, like, alcohol markers, and what I've come to understand is that a lot of the cheaper brands especially don't have a lot of, like, variety. Even if they have a lot of variety in color, they don't have a lot of variety in value, which is what you want. So you can only sort of get mid-tones. Like, all of these are pretty much mid-tones except for the light yellow, which is like slightly lighter, I guess. But I can make all of these colors with 2 pans of watercolor. Just getting a cheap set like one of these is going to give you sort of so many more options in what you can color and what you can make, as opposed to getting a set of markers, because with the markers you can't mix colors and you can't make lighter tones out of the tones you have. Let me see actually if I can also like make a darker tone of the red with the watercolor. That sometimes can be a little bit more tricky, but I could, one way is to add black, which can make it a little bit muddy, but it does become a darker red quite easily. Or then if you want to go a different route, you could add a little bit of blue to it. But like, as you can see, getting new and different colors is quite fast and quite easy, and it'll also like teach you a lot about like color theory and mixing colors and stuff that you're not necessarily going to get with alcohol markers. So it's also like, if you're just starting out, it's also better for learning. And obviously cheap watercolors are not light fast, but in that sense cheap watercolors and alcohol markers are very comparable, because no alcohol markers are light fast, even like the most fancy expensive ones, whereas you can get watercolors if you want to then like move to more professional grade stuff that is actually quite light fast. And I have one set of watercolor which is like, this is still student grade, but this was like for me like a fancier set of watercolors, which is like the Winsor & Newton Cotman. These are like this mini palette, which I've already gotten quite a bit of use out of. And like a palette like this will last you a long ass time. Like, and same with like these watercolors. I got these in high school and I used it pretty much exclusively for like at least a year for anything that I colored in. And the only color I've really made a dent into is the white, because I used it a lot to mix skin tones. But really, knowing more about watercolor now, you don't really even need to do that. You could just like add more water and make the lighter color that way. The one problem with this palette I have is that it did not come with a black. Like, I would have rather had a black than a white. But I've come to the conclusion that I can quite easily mix a color that comes across as black if I mix the darkest brown and then the cold blue. Like, okay, maybe a little bit more blue there. Like, that looks quite black if I compare it to like the actual black from this other set. It's a little bit warmer, but it looks quite similar. And at this point I feel like I'm repeating myself, so I'm just gonna do another sort of demonstration, experiment, example, whatever you want to call it, where I'm gonna like make the same line art twice and then color it in with watercolors on one side and with the markers that I have on the other side, to sort of illustrate the way that I can get a different result with watercolors. I think I don't know which palette I should use. I think I'm just gonna use this one because it has the fewest number of colors. So you can really see what I'm getting at here. Oh, before I do that, I was actually supposed to show you something else. Ignore my sketches. So about a year ago, I did this thing called Fairy Fae Week. And I made this illustration. And I was like trying to practice markers this whole week. So I did all of these with markers. And I was really happy with this like sketch and with this line art. And then I absolutely hated how it turned out when I colored it in. I don't hate it as much anymore, but it got like really splotchy and stuff, and I did not enjoy that at all. And then I tried to I had a picture of the sketch, so I tried to remake it and like trace that, but then it wasn't from straight up the sketch that I had, so the proportions got kind of messed up. And this one I just like put in a base layer of color with the alcohol marker and then tried to shade it with colored pencils, and then I was also not happy with this result. So this is sort of what's like gave me the idea of making this video, because it was just like really frustrating to me that I could not do what I like had in my head and wanted to do, and I was like, I wish I was using watercolors because I could have done this quite easily with watercolors. Anyway, now for that demonstration, I'm going to cut to that. I haven't actually even made a sketch for that yet, so I'm gonna get to that in real life. And I will see you soon. Good God, I've been recording for 19 minutes. I'm going to need to chop this up a little. Okay, voiceover time. So I had to trace this from a sketch twice using a lightbox because I don't have a printer that can print something that I can actually color on, so I just had to do it the old-fashioned way. And you might notice that the one on the right is missing an eyebrow. I did notice that eventually and fix it at the end, so don't worry. So the first one I'm doing with the markers, and like always when I work with markers, it was a struggle. I was missing the colors that I wanted. I wanted the jacket or whatever it is to be a sort of like navy blue, and I don't have a proper blue color in my marker selection, so I had to make do with what I had. And then the best blue that I had was almost completely dry, which is insane because I really have not used these markers that much, but I guess that's what you get for buying a really cheap marker. I also really struggled with coloring in the skin. Even though I do have some options when it comes to skin tones, I still felt like I didn't have enough in-between colors to make the blending sort of smooth, and then I ended up with this sort of nasty grayish undertone to the skin that I don't like at all. By the way, this is mixed media paper that I'm working with here, and I feel like it makes this a fair comparison because it's not the ideal option for either of these media. I definitely could have done a smoother job with the watercolor if I had used watercolor paper. Don't really know about the markers because I've never really used marker paper. But I don't know if you'll think that the watercolor one looks better than the marker one. Personally, I just feel like what's important is that it has the color scheme that I was going for, that I wanted to make, and I was able to do that because I was able to mix the colors that I wanted, whereas with the markers I was pretty much stuck with what I had, and I didn't have what I needed for this particular illustration. Anyways, thanks for listening to my rambles, and let me know if you think I'm totally wrong about this and markers are awesome for beginners. Just, feel free to yell at me in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you when I next make a video. Bye!